Members of the crew do not talk back to the captain. They simply carry out orders. The captain is the master of his ship, and his decrees are carried out. Likewise, your conscious mind is the captain and the master of your ship, which represents your body, environment, and all your affairs. Your subconscious mind takes the orders you give it based upon what your conscious mind believes and accepts as true. When you repeatedly say to people, "I can't afford it," then your subconscious mind takes you at your word and sees to it that you will not be in a position to purchase what you want. As long as you persist in saying, "I can't afford that car, that trip to Europe, that home, that fur coat or ermine wrap," you can rest assured that your subconscious mind will follow your orders, and you will go through life experiencing the lack of all these things. Last Christmas Eve, a beautiful young university student looked at an attractive and rather expensive traveling bag in a store window. She was going home to Buffalo, New York for the holidays. She was about to say, "I can't afford that bag," when she recalled something she had heard at one of my lectures, which was, never finish a negative statement. Reverse it immediately and wonders will happen in your life. She said, "That bag is mine. It is for sale. I accept it mentally, and my subconscious sees to it that I receive it." At 8 o'clock Christmas Eve, her fiancé presented her with a bag exactly the same as the one she had looked at and mentally identified herself with at 10 o'clock the same morning. She had filled her mind with the thought of expectancy and released the whole thing to her deeper mind, which has the know-how of accomplishment. This young girl, a student of the University of Southern California, said to me, "I didn't have the money to buy that bag, but now I know where to find money and all the things I need, and that is in the treasure house of eternity within me." Another simple illustration is this. When you say, "I do not like mushrooms," and the occasion subsequently comes that you are served mushrooms in sauces or salads, you will get indigestion because your subconscious mind says to you, "The boss, your conscious mind, does not like mushrooms." This is an amusing example of the outstanding differences and modes of operation of your conscious and subconscious minds. A woman may say, "I wake up at 3 o'clock if I drink coffee at night." Whenever she drinks coffee, her subconscious mind nudges her as if to say, "The boss wants you to stay awake tonight." Your subconscious mind works 24 hours a day and makes provisions for your benefit, pouring all the fruit of your habitual thinking into your lap. How her subconscious mind responded. A woman wrote me a few months ago as follows. "I am 75 years old, a widow with a grown family. I was living alone and on a pension. I heard your lectures on the powers of the subconscious mind, wherein you said that ideas could be conveyed to the subconscious mind by repetition, faith, and expectancy. I began to repeat frequently with feeling, 'I am wanted. I am happily married to a kind, loving, and spiritual-minded man. I am secure.' I kept on doing this many times a day for about 2 weeks, and one day at the corner drugstore I was introduced to a retired pharmacist. I found him to be kind, understanding, and very religious. He was a perfect answer to my prayer. Within a week he proposed to me, and now we are on our honeymoon in Europe. I know that the intelligence within my subconscious mind brought both of us together in divine order." This woman discovered that the treasure house was within her. Her prayer was felt as true in her heart, and her affirmation sank down by osmosis into her subconscious mind, which is the creative medium. The moment she succeeded in bringing about a subjective embodiment, her subconscious mind brought about the answer through the law of attraction. Her deeper mind, full of wisdom and intelligence, brought both of them together in divine order. Be sure that you think on whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think on these things. Chapter 2. How your own mind works. You have a mind, and you should learn how to use it. There are 2 levels of your mind, the conscious or rational level, and the subconscious or irrational level. You think with your conscious mind, and whatever you habitually think sinks down into your subconscious mind, which creates according to the nature of your thoughts. Your subconscious mind is the seat of your emotions, and is the creative mind. If you think good, good will follow. If you think evil, evil will follow. This is the way your mind works. The main point to remember is once the subconscious mind accepts an idea, it begins to execute it. It is an interesting and subtle truth that the law of the subconscious mind works for good and bad ideas alike. This law, when applied in a negative way, is the cause of failure, frustration, and unhappiness. However, when your habitual thinking is harmonious and constructive, you experience perfect health, success, and prosperity. Peace of mind and a healthy body are inevitable when you begin to think and feel in the right way. Whatever you claim mentally and feel as true, your subconscious mind will accept and bring forth into your experience. The only thing necessary for you to do is to get your subconscious mind to accept your idea, and the law of your own subconscious mind will bring forth the health, peace, or the position you desire. You give the command or decree, and your subconscious will faithfully reproduce the idea impressed upon it. The law of your mind is this. You will get a reaction or response from your subconscious mind according to the nature of the thought or idea you hold in your conscious mind. Psychologists and psychiatrists point out that when thoughts are conveyed to your subconscious mind, impressions are made in the brain cells. As soon as your subconscious accepts any idea, it proceeds to put it into effect immediately. It works by association of ideas and uses every bit of knowledge that you have gathered in your lifetime to bring about its purpose. It draws on the infinite power, energy, and wisdom within you. It lines up all the laws of nature to get its way. Sometimes it seems to bring about an immediate solution to your difficulties, but at other times it takes days, weeks, or longer. Its ways are past finding out. Conscious and subconscious terms differentiated. You must remember that these are not two minds. They are merely two spheres of activity within one mind. Your conscious mind is the reasoning mind. It is that phase of mind which chooses. For example, you choose your books, your home, and your partner in life. You make all your decisions with your conscious mind. On the other hand, without any conscious choice on your part, your heart is kept functioning automatically, and the process of digestion, circulation, and breathing are carried on by your subconscious mind through processes independent of your conscious control. Your subconscious mind accepts what is impressed upon it, or what you consciously believe. It does not reason things out like your conscious mind, and it does not argue with you controversially. Your subconscious mind is like the soil, which accepts any kind of seed, good or bad. Your thoughts are active and might be likened unto seeds. Negative, destructive thoughts continue to work negatively in your subconscious mind, and in due time will come forth into outer experience which corresponds with them. Remember, your subconscious mind does not engage in proving whether your thoughts are good or bad, true or false, but it responds according to the nature of your thoughts or suggestions. For example, if you consciously assume something is true, even though it may be false, your subconscious mind will accept it as true and proceed to bring about results, which must necessarily follow, because you consciously assumed it to be true. Experiments by psychologists. Innumerable experiments by psychologists and others on persons in the hypnotic state have shown that the subconscious mind is incapable of making selections and comparisons which are necessary for a reasoning process. They have shown repeatedly that your subconscious mind will accept any suggestions, however false. Having once accepted any suggestion, it responds according to the nature of the suggestion given. To illustrate the amenability of your subconscious mind to suggestion, if a practiced hypnotist suggests to one of his subjects that he is Napoleon Bonaparte, or even a cat or a dog, he will act out the part with imitable accuracy. His personality becomes changed for the time being. He believes himself to be whatever the operator tells him he is. A skilled hypnotist may suggest to one of his students in the hypnotic state that his back itches, to another that his nose is bleeding, to another that he is a marble statue, to another that he is freezing and the temperature is below zero. Each one will follow out the line of his particular suggestion, totally obvious to all his surroundings, which do not pertain to his idea. These simple illustrations portray clearly the difference between your conscious reasoning mind and your subconscious mind, which is impersonal, non-selective, and accepts as true whatever your conscious mind believes to be true. Hence, the importance of selecting thoughts, ideas, and premises which bless, heal, inspire, and fill your soul with joy. The terms objective and subjective mind clarified. Your conscious mind is sometimes referred to as your objective mind because it deals with outward objects. The objective mind takes cognizance of the objective world. Its media of observation are your 5 physical senses. Your objective mind is your guide and director in your contact with your environment. You gain knowledge through your 5 senses. Your objective mind learns through observation, experience, and education. As previously pointed out, the greatest function of the objective mind is that of reasoning. Suppose you are one of the thousands of tourists who come to Los Angeles annually. You would come to the conclusion that it is a beautiful city based upon your observation of the parks, pretty gardens, majestic buildings, and lovely homes. This is the working of your objective mind. Your subconscious mind is oftentimes referred to as your subjective mind. Your subjective mind takes cognizance of its environment by means independent of the 5 senses. Your subjective mind perceives by intuition. It is the seat of your emotion and the storehouse of memory. Your subjective mind performs its highest functions when your objective senses are in abeyance. In a word, it is that intelligence which makes itself manifest when the objective mind is suspended or in a sleepy, drowsy state. Your subjective mind sees without the use of the natural organs of vision. It has the capacity of clairvoyance and clairaudience. Your subjective mind can leave your body, travel to distant lands, and bring back information oftentimes of the most exact and truthful character. Through your subjective mind, you can read the thoughts of others, read the contents of sealed envelopes, and close safes. Your subjective mind has the ability to apprehend the thoughts of others without the use of the ordinary objective means of communication. It is of the greatest importance that we understand the interaction of the objective and subjective mind in order to learn the true art of prayer. The subconscious cannot reason like your conscious mind. Your conscious mind cannot argue controversially. Hence, if you give it wrong suggestions, it will accept them as true and will proceed to bring them to pass as conditions, experiences, and events. All things that have happened to you are based on thoughts impressed on your subconscious mind through belief. If you have conveyed erroneous concepts to your subconscious mind, the sure method of overcoming them is by the repetition of constructive, harmonious thoughts frequently repeated which your subconscious mind accepts, thus forming new and healthy habits of thought and life, for your subconscious mind is the seat of habit. The habitual thinking of your conscious mind establishes deep grooves in your subconscious mind. This is very favorable for you if your habitual thoughts are harmonious, peaceful, and constructive. If you have indulged in fear, worry, and other destructive forms of thinking, the remedy is to recognize the omnipotence of your subconscious mind and decree freedom, happiness, and perfect health.
That has thrown ourselves headlong into this game of trying to decipher our own programming language. And so it would be as though your computer started to control its own peripheral devices and pulled off its cover and pointed its webcam at its own circuitry and tried to figure out what it was made out of. That's the situation that we're in now. And what we have found under the hood is the most complicated thing we have ever found in the universe. So the human brain is 3 pounds. It contains tens of billions of neurons. Neurons are the specialized cell types in the brain. And every neuron is about as complicated as the city of New York. It contains the entire human genome in it, and it's trafficking millions of proteins. And these are connected to each other in such density that it bankrupts our language. And we have to invent new types of mathematics to even address this. There are so many connections between these neurons that it numbers in the hundreds of trillions, and it means that if you took just a cubic centimeter of brain tissue, there are as many connections in there as there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. So it's a tremendously complicated system. But the part that's really strange is that somehow this vast, wet biological network is you. It's all of your hopes and your dreams and your aspirations. It's the agony and the ecstasy. It's all contained in this stuff that's kind of alien to us, right? And the reason we know this is true and that it's not contained in, let's say, your pinky, is because if you were to damage your pinky in a car accident, you would be sad about it, but you'd be no different as a person. But if you damage an equivalently sized chunk of brain tissue, that can change you entirely. That can change your decision making, your risk aversion, your capacity to simulate possible futures and evaluate them, or your ability to see colors or name animals or understand music or 100 other things that change when your brain changes. And that's how we know, from hundreds of years of witnessing Mother Nature's cruel experiments with stroke and tumor and brain damage of various sorts, this is how we know that this is the densest representation of you. It is the basis of your decisions and your personality and how you act in the world and who you are. Now, even stranger is that essentially the entire operation of this, the most complicated system we've found, runs entirely under the hood of conscious awareness. It runs invisibly to you. So when I pick up a cup of coffee, that's actually underpinned by a lightning storm of brain activity to make that happen, to get the grip force right and the muscles and the joints. I'm not aware of any of that. All I'm aware of is whether I spill the coffee on myself or not. And the rest is totally invisible. And in fact, the early neuroscience pioneers pointed out that if it weren't for our study of the brain, you wouldn't even have any reason to suspect the existence of electrical signals and nerves and tendons and muscles and so on, because it's completely invisible. And of course, it's not just lifting a cup of coffee, it's everything that we do in life. It's getting a joke, or recognizing a friend's face, or falling in love, driving a car. Anything we do is running underneath the hood, and we have very little idea about how we're doing it. And this is what leads to the idea of the unconscious brain. And it turns out that the conscious mind, the part of you that flickers to life when you wake up in the morning, that's the smallest bit of what's happening in your brain. That's the broom closet in the mansion of the brain. So think about when you have an idea and you say, oh, I just thought of something. It wasn't actually you that thought of it, right? I mean, your brain's been working on that behind the scenes for hours or days, consolidating information, evaluating things, trying things out. At some point, it's ready. It serves it up to your conscious brain, and you say, oh, I'm a genius. But it wasn't really you, right? So it turns out that the conscious mind is like a stowaway on a transatlantic steamship that's taking credit for the whole journey without acknowledging the massive engineering that's underfoot. As Carl Jung put it, in each of us there is another whom we do not know. And as Pink Floyd said, there's someone in my head, but it's not me. So let me give you an example of this. There was a study some years ago where men were asked to rate the attractiveness of women's faces in photographs. So they would look at the photos, and from 1 to 10, they would rate how attractive they thought they were. What the men didn't know is that in half of the photographs, the women's eyes had been dilated with some eye drops. And it turns out that the men uniformly ranked the pictures with the dilated eyes as more attractive. But the important part is that none of the men said, oh yeah, I noticed that her pupil was a millimeter larger over here. None of them noticed that consciously. And presumably, none of the men knew that dilated eyes is a biological sign of sexual readiness in women. But their brains knew it. Whoop. And here they were, running the right sorts of decisions, running these deep evolutionary programs that steered their behavior in the right way without them having any conscious access to what was going on there. And it turns out the unconscious mind has tremendous influence on all of the decisions we make in life. As an example, if your name is Dennis or Denise, you are statistically more likely to become a dentist. Now you can prove this to yourself. You can prove this by going through the professional dental registries in any state and showing that there's an overrepresentation. This is because of what psychologists call implicit egotism. We like things that remind us of ourselves. It turns out you even like people better who share your birthday, even though that's totally arbitrary. Anyway, you'd agree that this is a terrible reason to choose a life profession, right? But there it is. And if you asked any of these Dennises or Denises why they chose dentistry, they would have some sort of conscious narrative about how it's a good profession and they like teeth and so on. But what their narrative would be missing would be these unconscious influences. And it's not just things like life professions. It's even who you choose as your life mate. You can prove to yourself by going through the marriage registries in any county that you are statistically more likely to marry someone whose first name begins with the same first letter as your first name. So Joe and Jenny, Alex and Amy, Donnie and Daisy. It's a small statistical effect, but totally verifiable. And it's a terrible reason to choose a life mate, right? And if you ask them their conscious narrative about how they chose this person, it probably would not be included. But there it is. It turns out there are influences on all sorts of very important things we do in life. And these can be pulled out in the laboratory very easily. For example, if you're holding a mug of hot coffee, you will describe your relationship with your mother as closer than if you're holding an iced coffee. Strange but true, and it turns out there are these unconscious signals all the time that change how we perceive our relationship with the world. So there's this enormous gap between what our mind has access to and what the brain is actually doing under the hood. And to circle back around to the main point, the issue is that when we look at the wetware under the hood, it's completely alien to us. It's made up of this strange alien landscape of neurons and synapses and chemicals of all sorts. And yet somehow that strange material maps onto the decisions that we make and our behavior and our personality, what we take to be reality. That's the situation that we find ourselves in. And so this simple fact, this equivalence between this alien stuff that we don't have access to and the way we behave in the world leads us right into the heart of some very deep ethical questions, which I want to address here. So let me give you a few examples of this, and we'll go right into the landscape here. So many of you are probably familiar with the story of Phineas Gage. For those of you who aren't, he was a young railroad worker in the 1880s. And there was an explosion that blew an iron rod through his head, and the rod clattered to the ground 50 yards away. And the reason it became a famous medical case is, first of all, because he didn't die, which was unusual. He didn't even lose consciousness. But it's because his personality changed entirely. That's why it became a famous case. Instantly, as soon as this part of his prefrontal lobe was stripped away, he became a different person. And people who knew him said, Gage is no longer Gage. He used to be a sweet young man that everyone liked. Now he cusses, and he's a pathological gambler, and he sleeps with prostitutes, and he's just a completely different person. So this was one of the first very clear cases where people said, wow, when your biology changes, you change also. You are somehow irrevocably yoked to this 3 pounds of tissue. Who you are, what people love about you, how you make decisions. It's all tied into this. Now that was 130 years ago, and in the meantime we've had a lot of Phineas Gages. I'll give you an example. Some of you may remember in 1966 Charles Whitman, who climbed to the top of the tower at the University of Texas at Austin, and he began to indiscriminately open fire on people below. He shot pedestrians, he shot the people who came to help them, he shot the ambulance drivers who came to help them, and in total he killed 14 people and wounded 39 others that day. And the police finally were able to make it to the top of the tower and kill him. And the first thing they wanted to know is, who is this person? And they went to his house in Austin and discovered that the night before he had killed his wife and his mother. And he had sat down at the typewriter and written what amounted to a suicide note. So the only thing that was stranger than this incredibly random act of violence was that there was nothing about Whitman that presaged this sort of behavior. He had been an Eagle Scout. He was high IQ. He was an engineering student at the University of Texas. He worked as a bank teller. There was nothing in particular about him that would have indicated he would have ever done something like this. And so everybody wanted answers. And it turns out when they read his suicide note, they discovered that Whitman also wanted answers. He described in his note and also in his diary that he'd kept carefully for the last year that something inside of him had been changing, and that he felt that he was victim to all sorts of angry thoughts and urges that he'd never had before. And he wanted to do something about it. And he went to a psychiatrist in 1966, but it didn't do any good. It didn't help him. And he said in his suicide note, "When this is all over, I want an autopsy to be performed." And that's exactly what happened. And they lifted his brain out of the vault of his skull, and they discovered that he had a brain tumor. It was a brain tumor that was pressing on a part of his brain called the amygdala, which is involved in fear and aggression. And it was another example that when the brain changes, you can change also. Here's an example from more recently. This was in the medical literature. It was a 40-year-old man who had a normal sexual appetite and started becoming a pedophile. He started collecting up child pornography, becoming obsessed with this. At some point, he made an inappropriate move on his prepubescent stepdaughter in the house, and his wife had him arrested. And the night before sentencing, he was having these worsening headaches. So he went to the emergency room, and they did a brain scan on him. And what they discovered was that he had a massive prefrontal tumor. He had a tumor, it was growing, and it was changing his personality. They removed the tumor in an emergency surgery, and his sexual behavior returned completely to normal. And the story has an interesting postscript, because about 8 months later, he started showing signs of pedophilia again. His wife took him back to the doctors. It turns out they had missed a part of the tumor, which was now regrowing. So they resected the tumor a second time, and his sexual behavior returned to normal a second time. So what these demonstrate to us is you are tied to your biology, and there's no way you can escape that. And when you think about who you are and the kind of decisions you make, it is a function of what's going on under the hood. And of course, people have always known this. I mean, all over the world, people will pour ethanol over their mucosal membranes to make themselves funnier at a party and things like that. And people use drugs of all sorts, which change their personality. This is Chris Benoit, who was a Worldwide Wrestling Federation champion. And he went home one night and killed his wife and his son, and then hung himself from one of the pulleys of his weight machine. It turns out that his doctor had conspired with him to give him 8 times the normal levels of testosterone that a man is supposed to have, and he was having a roid rage. It completely changed his cognition. Some of you may know the story of what's happened with Parkinson's medications. Several years ago, it was noticed that some of these patients who were on Parkinson's medications were starting to become pathological gamblers, and they were blowing their families' fortunes in Las Vegas. And upon investigation, it came to be understood Parkinson's involves a neurotransmitter system called dopamine, and dopamine is involved in the motor problems with Parkinson's, but it's also a molecule that serves a double duty in the reward systems in the brain. And when you change the levels of dopamine, that changes people's risk aversion, and it can turn people into pathological gamblers. And so now it's one of the warnings on the label. It says if you become a pathological gambler, you just titrate the dosage here. So if you ever think about, okay, well, I'm the kind of person who makes terrific decisions and I'm not a gambler, you have to understand that it's a matter of what's going on in your biology. And what I think all this comes down to is that nowadays when we're talking about morality and decision making, what we're really talking about is the neural basis of this. And this leads to a very deep question, which is the question about free will. Are we free to choose how we act, or is the mind equal to the brain? Well, I think what's clear, it's not known whether we have free will or not. This is a hotly debated topic. But what is very clear is that the unconscious mind is the one that's in charge, and the conscious bit on top is not the one driving the boat. And that most of how you feel and how you act and how you behave and what you believe to be true, all this stuff is being generated by systems under the hood that you have no access to and very little acquaintance with even. That's the situation. And when we look at things like what you're attracted to and how you feel about other people and the kind of personality you have and the kind of decision making you do and hundreds of things like this, what seems clear is that if free will exists, it is a small player in the system. You're tied to your biology. If you don't believe it, use your free will to change your sexual orientation. So go ahead, switch it. Right? Good luck, because you're tied to your biology, and we don't have as much play in the wheel as we like to believe we have when it comes to free will. Now, all of this leads to a really deep question, which is, if so much stuff is running under the hood, what does this all mean for our responsibility in the world? And what does it mean for the way that we run our social policy? Well, the legal system as we have it now rests on two main assumptions. The first one is that we are practical reasoners. This is the term of art. That means that we are free to choose how we act in the world. We get to walk into a situation and use our free will to navigate our behavior around. And the second assumption is that all brains are equal, meaning if you're over the age of 18 and you have an IQ of over 70, then it's assumed that all brains are the same in terms of capacity for decision making, impulse control, the ability to simulate possible futures and evaluate them, and so on. And that's a very charitable assumption, but it's demonstrably false. Because along any axis that you measure brains, you find there's a very wide variety. And this is because brains come about as an interaction of genetics and environment. Every environmental experience you ever have. And this sends brains off on very different developmental trajectories. And as a result, all brains are very different, just like faces in the room, just like fingerprints. Everybody's got them, but they're very different from one another. And so neuroscience suggests that these are not very good assumptions. And the problem with these assumptions is that it's led us to treat incarceration as a one-size-fits-all solution. And as a result of that, America is the #1 country in the world for the percentage of our population that we put behind bars. This is concerning because prison is provably criminogenic, which means it causes more crime. You put people in jail, you break their employment opportunities, you break their social circles, they have high chances of coming back around. And the estimates now are that 30% of our prison population has mental illness, which means that our prison system has become our de facto mental health care system. This isn't the right place for us to be putting our mentally ill. And this kind of system of putting everybody in jail, it's not cost effective, and it has very low utility for solving anything. Now, it turns out one thing I need to make very clear is that as we get deeper biological insight into the differences between people and why they behave differently, this does not exculpate anybody. What this gives us instead is the capacity to do rational sentencing, to do customized rehabilitation, and to do realistic incentive structuring. Instead of imagining that everyone responds the same to the same sort of deterrence, in fact, people's brains are different, and people respond in very different ways. And the thing is, we all talk about and agree on things like tailored education, so why not have tailored social policy? It turns out it's so much more cost effective to front load at the beginning an understanding of why very different people may have committed the same crime and how to navigate intelligently through the system into the future from there. There's a real need for understanding this. This is from Whitman's suicide note. He said, if my life insurance policy is valid, please pay off my debts. Donate the rest anonymously to a mental health foundation. Maybe research can prevent further tragedies of this type. It's very haunting, I think. And this is what led me to start, some years ago, the Initiative on Neuroscience and Law, which brings together neuroscientists and judges and lawyers and decision makers to understand what's happening at the intersection of neuroscience and the legal system. And I'm just very briefly going to mention the kind of things at the intersection here. For example, drug addiction. We put drug addicts in jail now. We spend $40 billion a year on the war on drugs. And it's totally unwinnable because we're attacking drug supply. And if you press supply down in one place, it's going to pop up somewhere else. If you want to address the drug problem, you have to address drug demand, which is the brain of the addict. And we know so much about the circuitry and pharmacology at this point of drug addiction. My colleagues and I, all over the world, we're doing a lot of work to figure out how to help drug addiction in a way that we don't have to put people in jail for it, but instead we can help them. The insanity defense is something that's at the intersection of these fields. This is always in flux. Lawyers and legislators need a better understanding of the reality of mental illness. Brain death is another point of intersection. Part of the brain can die while part is alive, and then the legal system has to make this decision about when you declare somebody dead, and modern technologies with brain imaging are allowing us to look into the brain and answer that question in a better way. eyewitness testimony, one of the worst technologies we allow in the courtroom, and yet it has the most sway on jurors. And then the other thing we're studying is the effect on jurors' brains and how jurors make decisions, which is the other half of the equation, and why they're hardwired for attributivism, and when it makes sense to try to override that. So if anyone's interested in more on this, go to newlaw.org. I just want to say one thing in closing here, which is that sometimes when we look at the brain and we realize that it's a little scary that we're not the ones at the center anymore. We're not the ones driving the boat. That feels scary to us. But in fact, I think there's a nice historical analogy here, which is in 1610 when Galileo discovered the moons of Jupiter and discovered we weren't the ones at the center of the orbits. That was decried as a dethronement of man from his position at the center of things. But dethronements have an upside, which is we came to understand that the whole universe is so much more grand and wondrous and subtle than we could have ever imagined back when we thought we were at the center. And I think exactly the same thing is happening in cognitive science, which is that as we sail into this inner cosmos and discover all these alien life forms, what we realize is that what's happening there is so much more grand and wondrous and subtle than we could have ever imagined. And the bottom line is that we have found the most amazing thing in the universe, and it is us. Thank you very much for your attention.
Fantastic.